Today I'm going to be discussing with you my recent Croatian road trip. A trip that initially was a Balkans scouting trip that I made successful changes to just prior to departure. So in this video I'm going to provide you with an overview of the tour, but also give you my lessons. We're going to discuss the lessons that I learned while photographing off the beaten path in Croatia. Okay then, so where have I been? Why the break on the channel? Well, a small little break because I was actually preparing for an exhibition that's coming here in Istanbul in September, and the images, I didn't expect them to select so many. There's over 30 photos that they've selected for the show. Photography 212 is here in Istanbul. The dates are September the 28th to October the 13th. So if you're in and around Turkey, Istanbul, even as far as the Balkans, maybe pop on over and check it out. It's going to be coming up in a future video, all about the files being prepared, the actual installation, of course, the show itself. It's 3 weeks that it's on. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be great. Why Croatia then? And did I advertise the tour? Well, technically, no, I didn't. It was a replacement for a fully booked Lebanon photography trip in May of this year. And back in February, I actually cancelled that trip, which in hindsight was the right decision. I usually run 6 or 7 tours a year, and this year they were fully booked out and I was concentrating on making new additions to my itinerary. Romania was my key objective. I was nearly done, but not quite. I had one more scouting trip, personal one, to do in Romania. And of course, I was looking at kind of 2025 was my main objective for this year. To cancel something that was planned out so well, one of my better photography tours, was not an easy thing to do. But I decided to offer out the chance to the group to join me on a new scouting trip. And you might say to me, James, what's the difference between a scouting trip and a main tour? Well, I'll tell you. The main tour, usually for me, is a guarantee of entry to locations. I usually do 2 interiors a day, lots of nice off the beaten path filler locations, so kind of relics, ruins. Maybe it's some cool monuments or some hidden spot in the country that usually tourists don't go to that often. And of course, my priority is group management. I have a driver, he helps me, he speaks the local language, and I can focus on the group and maintaining those kind of relationships, if you will, giving them the insights, the photography knowledge that I have. With a scouting tour, none of those things would be guaranteed. The food spots, the bars, entry locations, the waiting around could be way more than it is on a main tour. The group management versus the relationship building on the ground would be the biggest sort of challenge, if you will. I would have to try and balance those two things. It would be quite difficult to do. So there's no guarantees technically. However, there would be then a lower price point to kind of balance these things out. But in this case, it had to remain the same. Croatia has much more costs associated with it than Lebanon, for example, vehicle hire. To counteract this, I would drive on the tour. I would initially go for 2 weeks. I would hire a van for that. And because I'm driving, I'm the one really there making the sacrifice. It makes vlogging, video creating, content creation in general much more difficult. My prime target remains the same, to make contacts and to create images. It's just that those extras, if you will, the extra stuff, kind of can't happen. So how did the scouting tour go? Well, I'm pleased to say it was a roaring success. There was a few things that I did in advance of this trip taking place that made it work really, really well. But one of them is my first and main learning, to be honest with you. And that was that just before departing, about a week before, I decided to cancel the entire south of Croatia from the scouting trip and focus entirely and only on the north and add the south in to a personal trip I was doing a couple of weeks later with my wife in the south and add it on to kind of my Montenegro and Bosnia explorations. Removing the south meant that there was going to be way less driving, still a lot, but way less, and that would allow more time on the ground for the people to kind of have free time, explore around, alert me to any possibilities, and so on. This also meant that the group could split up more, move freely around without tripping one another up. Pretty essential, to be honest with you. In our first location, Zagreb, which is where we started the scouting tour, I didn't learn a lot. To be honest with you, in urban environments like that, I don't. Now, Zagreb's a beautiful city, and I had an idea of where to go. I had some pointers, places I'd researched in advance, and I'm going to talk about that in a future video too. But essentially, I knew where to go, I had a rough plan, and ultimately the group got great images. They started the trip brilliantly, and so did we. We got some really cool locations in Zagreb. Okay, so we didn't learn a lot in Zagreb, but on the next location, the first location outside of Zagreb, we learnt a lot. But they weren't really like lessons for me, more of kind of reminders, big reminders. The first comes in the form of arriving with a group. Now, usually I rock up to a location on my own and I build trust with the contact to get to the point of taking a group later. And that's quite key. You have to kind of show them that you're there for the right intentions. Donate some money, come with a group, and that's the whole purpose of what I do. On this occasion, I had a group with me, and that led to, for no reason, no fault of our own, the people, once we were inside, changing their mind about us being inside for 2 hours, which is the initial time they granted us. They told us, after an hour, you need to leave now. So we had to rush around, finish up and go, which is not a problem, but it can happen. There's no guarantees, like I said, with the scouting. Now, I know from interior photography that my best images are usually captured actually on return visits or by planning my visit to that interior because I know it to get there at the right time of day. Now, in the entrance of the location, the swimming pool was stunning. Great colours, it was softly lit, easy to capture, beautiful spot. But the bit that I was looking forward to, the part of this location that I was looking forward to, was at the rear of it. There was 2 bathhouses in the back, which had stunning kind of colours, and one of them, in the very rear of it, had a cool tree growing outside of the wall on the left-hand side, which looked fantastic. The problem was we were there in the middle of the day, harsh midday sun in the Balkans, in the heat, sun blasting in the kind of skylight at the top, filling the floor with lighting, which doesn't help you when it comes to post-processing your images. So my big takeaway is none of this. It's actually a huge one, and it's one that usually I don't change my opinion on very much, and that's to do with my equipment. Going forward in the autumn, I'm actually going to make some key equipment changes, and they're all going to help me to make better content and images for this channel. First of all, I'm going to change my tripod. That's just a given because it's getting a bit old, but ultimately it's because I'm getting a new geared head. My geared head is a nightmare, it's wobbling, I don't want it anymore. I decided enough's enough. That is annoying. There's images that I captured on this tour where there's actually shots that have moved frame to frame. It's not a big issue, but of course it slows down your post-processing. But the next one is to do with the content creation itself, the video making in particular. I've had enough. I'm actually going to get a DJI Pocket 3 moving forward and ultimately have less reliance on the RP. And the reason for that is I think I want to show more of the behind the scenes of what I do. I want a quick and easy camera to do that. I want to be able to quickly vlog, talk about what it is we're doing with an inconspicuous camera, and I've decided that's the one for me. If I pair that with the R5 and just have that on a tripod, it's smaller, easier to carry around, less equipment to carry, less chance of breakages, and less reliance on the Canon RP and having 2 full-frame cameras with me. So I'm going to make that change, and I'm also potentially going to not replace the RP, I'm going to keep it, but I'm going to add into my equipment a fun camera, a small kind of pocket camera that I can carry around with me, that I can get snapshots, filler shots to help advertise the trips with, speed up my workflow. It's taken me 2.5 weeks solidly on Lightroom of editing these Croatia photos, and that has to change. It's not good enough for me. So this is a huge takeaway for me from this trip. So I also learned that there's a certain type of person that suits this concept of trip better than others. It tends to be adventurous types, and I also learned that the group needs to be smaller than a full group tour. Another take home for me is that I really enjoy exploring the new places that I've never been, and this is a key strength of mine. I'd researched heavily with a real passion for it months in advance the places that we were going to go, and that led to great images. This gives me a real advantage when it comes to seeking out locations that others rarely visit. There's always going to be locations that don't suit a group tour, so I stayed behind in the north to film content that you watched on the channel recently, and also to sort of shoot spots that were not really group friendly, and this turned out to be a great way to do it. Removing the southern section to do this part solo turned out to be another masterstroke. The south was infrequent. The weather, as you saw in the last video, was brutally hot. However, the south did feature some of my favourite spots in Croatia. There was also this apartment in Split, where I found a beautiful staircase that immediately, of course, caught my eye. I love a staircase. While photographing it, I met an elderly resident who shared some fascinating stories with me. He told me about iron railings that once adorned the stairs, which were stolen in the 60s. He also talked about how this apartment survived the war in the 90s, a time when many buildings like this in Split were damaged or destroyed. Then there was Bozdari House, a mansion built right on the waterfront in the late 1700s, a river lapping up to its facade. In the 18th century, visitors would have to arrive by boat, but the river became a road in the early 1900s and a little part of this mansion's magic disappeared. River or no river, the water has always been a heart of this enchanting place, as these days it sits beside the sea. And inside, there's 4 paintings decorating a large entrance hall on the top floor, one of which depicts Zeus's 3 lovers. Yep, you guessed it, it's an Italian architect. The final takeaway then is the finances. To be honest with you, I normally go to a location a couple of times. Let's take Romania as an example. I went there seeking out spots. I went there 3 times. 2023, actually, December 22, twice in 23, all in advance of a trip in April 24. It's a big country. Essentially, I spent quite a lot of money. And this is the problem, is I was kind of always on an uphill battle to kind of balance how much I could scout to kind of produce a really excellent trip. Now, don't get me wrong, my April trip to Romania was stunning, excellent, one of my best tours that I now run. And by the way, that's taking place in March of 25 again, and the link is in the description below. You can check that out. It's by far one of my better tours, and the reason for that is it was really expensive to get to that point. I made 3 recce tours, 3 scouting tours solo prior to that trip being arranged, and that's costly. And I usually have to kind of create then a pressure on myself to sell consecutive trips fully booked out to recoup some of that money. And I perhaps need to look at that in the future as a way to do more scouting tours to kind of help finance some of this. Maybe take, not on every tour, but take a small scouting trip to part of the scouting for that country or location moving forward. With this in mind, 3 weeks ago, I launched Serbia and Montenegro, a scout for April 2025, because I need to return back to the Balkans in advance of something I'm doing with Greg Snell next year. And guess what? Sold out already. So don't despair that these tours are sold out, because they are just scouting tours, but they're all in preparation for a much bigger project. Next year, the Hidden Photo Tour to the Balkans takes place. I'm doing that in conjunction with Greg Snell, October the 23rd to November the 2nd, 2025. The reason I was doing these 2 scouting tours, and I might have to do one more just before our full trip, they're to get us prepared. Because we have 2 vehicles, 2 leaders, a lot of fun, and we discuss video, photography and more on these trips. Mixing hidden landscape photography, which is what Greg does, with what I do, interiors and architecture photography. You'll learn a lot along the way, and you'll have locations ready to go. The link, actually 2 links, is down in the description below. I've given you a link to Hidden Photo Tour's website and a link to my own personal site where you can book on, pay your deposit and join us. Now, there's already quite a lot of bookings and interest on this trip. There's only 4 spaces left. I urge you to join us. It's going to be a lot of fun, as it was in Georgia just last year. So of course I'm still going to be running my own personal tours. They're much more urban kind of centered, urban centric. And my personal trips for 2025 are now released on my website too, with an exception. There might be one more added in late notice at a later date. But I have released my Romania tour. There's 5 or 6 spaces available to book, as I mentioned earlier, down in the link in the description below. I've also released a new autumn tour for here in Turkey with a new route. Check that one out. And my Cyprus Uncovered for next November too is over on my website. However, the eagle-eyed amongst you may notice there is also a scouting tour on there, and you can register your interests. They're not open for bookings yet, again, on that page. And there's also one for 2026 where you can register your interest to come and join me in Namibia too. Okay, so that's pretty much me in terms of tours. All the plugs and all the talk about tours is over with. What about the future of the channel? Well, I'm going to change the content up a little bit with this new gear in mind and the ideas I've got moving forward. Hopefully that will help with the reach issues as well. Content in general, I'm getting hit quite a lot when it comes to content creating because I'm doing it from Istanbul. So if you like my videos and you like what I'm doing, if you like a future video, please do share it with a friend, like, comment. I'd love to hear from you. It'll be great to know. And as Istanbul cools, my workload is going to increase because I'm going to go out, do the exhibition. I'm also going to do some content from here in Istanbul, and I've got my autumn trips taking place. Budapest, Romania, Georgia, and more. Keep an eye out for all of that. Until next time, I hope you've enjoyed this overview. Keep a lookout for the Canon R5 video coming next on the channel. Until then, bye-bye for now. See you all very, very soon.